training wheels off. It is a huge honor to be with you. And for those who don't know my story, you'll hear a little bit more about it today. But you'll also hear my connection to the Parkinson's family. And I've decided very intentionally to share two stories of leaders in my life, both diagnosed with Parkinson's disease, what they went through, what they learned, what they taught, and if we're lucky, what it means for us. I want this to be an interactive conversation. So as Roger said, if you have any questions for O'Leary, just type it in, and we'll certainly get to it at the end. And then at the very, very end, everybody will go off mute, and we'll just continue the conversation. All right, so Sharayna is saying the video is echoing. I thought it might be important to have a little bit of a background story and where I came from. So I'm going to show you a picture. Roger, can you make me the host? Thank you, Janet. We see that the sound is good with you. All right, so thank you. This, my friends, is a picture of Mr. John O'Leary at age 9 after being burned on his entire body coming home from the hospital. So what this doesn't show is clearly is the fact that I'm in a wheelchair because I can't stand, and I don't have fingers on my hands as a kid, and I still don't as an adult. And that little wrapping you saw around my head, it's there because I've taken almost 20 layers of skin as a donor site from my scalp. And so the bandages remain, the wounds are open, the scars are there. The little boy is struggling. And my dream as a little boy was not one day to become a speaker. You heard in Roger's introduction of me that I've done some work around the world now. That was not the dream. My dream after my diagnosis, after being burned on my entire body, was to be ordinary. Not to take the training wheels off, but to leave them on. Not to soar in life, but to fit in. That was my goal. That was the one dream of my life, was just to be ordinary again. And I tried my best to do that, but I never quite fit in. So in grade school, I tried to laugh and make others laugh a little bit more than anybody else, the class clown. In high school and college, I became relatively addicted, drank entirely too much, entirely too frequently. So I'm just trying to mask the pain of the diagnosis, of the struggle. And I don't think I'm alone in this. And then at age 28, my life changed in several ways, but one was this. I was in a church service, and I'm not going to go all spiritual on you, so some of you will be disappointed, others will be grateful, but I'll play kind of in the middle. But for me, faith is a really important part of my journey in my life. So I'm 28 years old, in church, in the back row, fitting in. And the pastor is preaching on the gift of talents. And ultimately, the call of talents is, if you have 5 talents, multiply, 2 talents, multiply. But I always knew I had one, in particular after my diagnosis, after being burned and losing everything. So then the pastor comes to John, and maybe for some of you, the way you might feel today with your diagnosis and your struggle in your life. And he looks at me, it's a crowded church, but it feels like he's looking right at me, and he says, and if you think you only have one talent, listen to me. You are a precious, priceless gift. Say yes to being used for good. So I want you to remember that today, because I'll come back to it. Your life is a precious, priceless gift. Say yes to being used for good. So I'm hearing that. 2 days afterwards, I'm working construction. Can you imagine a worse job for a guy without fingers to take on than a construction career? But that's what I did, because I was trying to pretend like I was ordinary, trying to act like I was normal. So I take my phone out, answer the phone. I said, hello, this is John. And this little voice on the other side says, Mr. O'Leary, would you speak at my school? And men and ladies and friends and care partners and those of us who've been diagnosed with Parkinson's disease, I'd never spoken anywhere about anything. But after hearing the message, John, your life is a precious, priceless gift. Say yes to being used for good. I answered back to this little girl an important response to serving in life, whether it's Roger or a third grade little girl. And the answer is yes. Yes. So I said yes, spoke to this little group, never once looked up at those little monsters. When I finally did at the end of my 15-minute program as a 28-year-old man, this is the group that I saw in front of me. A grand total of 3 third grade Girl Scouts. That's my first coming out party. They did not even pay me with a box of Samoas. Okay, so it's not really high income coming in right now. It's the gift of using your life for good. Shared the story there, walked out of that room. One of the dads said, John, that was terrific. Would you share at my Rotary Club? I'm embarrassed to say it, but it's true. I'd never heard of Rotary, but I knew the answer to serving in life. Yes, let's go. So I spoke at a Rotary, then Kiwanis, then Chamber of Commerce. And over the last 19 years, I've had the joy of traveling around not only the United States, we've been in 50 states, but in dozens of countries, in front of millions of people live, sharing a story that ultimately is about their life. It's about their disease. It's about their diagnosis. It's about their struggles. And it's about their opportunity of saying yes to being used for good. So let me turn off my little clicker so you don't hear these beeps as we go forward on. But my friends, that is our chance, regardless of where we are in our life, the talents that we think we have. And that's what I want to hover over in the 30 or so minutes we have left together. How you and I can do that in our lives, regardless of how many talents we think we possess. So today we're going to talk primarily about 2 things as we say yes to being used for good. The first is gratitude for all that we have. And I learned this example from a friend of mine who has been diagnosed with Parkinson's disease. And the second is vision for all that we still can do. And I learned about the power of vision from a friend of mine who has been diagnosed with Parkinson's disease. So if you think this story today is going to be about a kid who got burned as a little boy, you're going to be very disappointed. Because today I'm talking about men and women who've been diagnosed. I'm talking about their care partners. I'm talking about what they learned, how they grew, what they taught, and what it means for us. So buckle up, get ready for it. Number 1, gratitude for all that we have. That's the starting point. Gratitude for all that we have. Gratitude matters. And for those of us who choose it, regardless of the diagnosis we may have, it makes us more optimistic. It makes us more kind. It makes us less self-centered. It lowers our blood pressure. It increases our energy regardless of the diagnosis. It increases our longevity. It gives us better marriages, enduring relationships. Makes us more attractive, Roger. You and I are examples of that, baby. Increased career opportunities, likelihood promotion, enhanced productivity, all that stuff. Good for them. That's the stuff of life, but stuff fades. The reason why I want to celebrate with you today gratitude is this gift it will give you. It's the gift of joy, not happiness. The world trades on happiness. You write a book on happiness and it's likely you might become a bestseller because the world wants happy. They want to be happy. They just want to be happy, which means disease-free, which means no diagnosis, which means no struggles, which means a lot of money in the bank, which means tons of followers and you're sexy and you're good looking and life is perfect all the time and you're happy. You're happy. And that's not real life. And if you're on the call with us today, you know that to be true. That's not real life. Life is hard and it's messy and it's gritty and it's hard to explain sometimes. So I'm not here to sell you on happiness. It's a lie. I want to give you joy. And when I think about joy and the study of what leads to it is gratitude being part of it. The person that I've been studying for a long time who models this is pictured up there in the middle of the O and well, because that's my dad. I celebrated my dad just 2 days ago at home here in St. Louis, Missouri. That's my dad. But what that picture and what that smile doesn't show very clearly is that my dad 32 years ago was diagnosed with Parkinson's disease. So a diagnosis many of us in this room wear. and many of the care partners, you understand the struggles here. My father and his wife, my mom, understand it all too well. For 3+ decades, they've been enduring Parkinson's disease. And yet I'm going to go through just a couple pictures of my dad today. And as I go through them, type into the chat, what do you notice about my dad's face? All right, so I'm going to take a sip of coffee, give you a moment to answer it. What do you notice about my dad's face? And you don't see it in that one. Perhaps you'll see it in this one more clearly. The first to chat in, Shireen, I'm glad you were the first one in. Happy. And then Drew, the smile. Yes, and yes. They keep filling up the chat now. Roger, super joy. Yes, indeed, that's a good way to say it. Super joy. That's my mom. That's his caretaker. Let me go back one. That's my daughter. Her name is Grace. She's at the baseball game with her granddaddy. The emotion you wear into a room, men and women and leaders and ladies, is reflected by the room you walk or roll into. My dad can no longer walk. He can no longer ambulate. And yet that little girl with blonde hair seated next to her granddaddy can't even hear his voice now because he's nonverbal. But that joy reflected in granddaddy's face is mirrored and actually multiplied in hers. It's important to recognize that. Not easy, but possible. And life-changing, not only for you, but for those lucky enough to do life next to you. This is my business. This is the one that Roger reached out to a couple months ago. I have 9 employees. By far, my worst employee is pictured up on the screen. Okay, he's a horrible employee. He comes to work when he wants, which lately is about quarterly. We get him out of the wheelchair, stack the work in front of him, and yet you see on his face this gift of joy. Super joy, says Roger. Smile, happiness, yes and yes and yes. This was my last speaking event in 2020 before the world changed. Those ladies and gentlemen lined up not to meet John, the speaker. They wanted to meet the hero, that man in the wheelchair. He wouldn't say anything to them, but he didn't need to. He didn't need to. They saw it on his face, something that they probably did not see in that morning in the reflection in the mirror on their face. This embodiment of contentment, of gratitude, of passion, of purpose, of call, of joy. I sat with my dad a couple years ago when he still had the ability to speak, and I said, Dad, why don't you complain more about how difficult life is? You know, like it's really challenging right now. Why don't you talk more about it? And he looked at me almost surprised and said, how could I complain when life is so good? It sounds like he's faking it, but I've been with this man long enough to know that he's not. So I said, Dad, can you give me 3 things you're grateful for, specifically because of Parkinson's disease? Not like in spite of it or back in the good old days before you got the diagnosis. Give me 3 things you're grateful for because of PD. 3 things. So I'm going to share with you today his 3, and then in about 3 minutes invite you to identify 3 things today that you are grateful for. So the first thing my dad said, and this one blew me away, so I wrote it down. I'm just grateful it was not a more serious disease, which is stunning for a man who's lost so much because of it. But he recognized, as bad as it is, I guess it could have been worse, which is an unusual perspective. One I'm not sure I would have absorbed. The second thing he said is, man, I used to be so busy. Gosh, I raced fast and hard. Now I've got nothing but time to reflect on who I am, what matters most in my life, and where God is in my story. I'm grateful for this time. The third, the final thing my dad said, I've always liked your mom. So I said, Dad, I'm glad you like my mom. That's, thumbs up, man. I'm glad you like your wife. And he said, you're missing the point. Everyone else is pushing me away. My coworkers, who I started this business with, no longer saw value in the work that I did, so they showed me the exit. My friends who used to come around for a round of golf or a round of beer don't do either. But your mother, my wife, just keeps stepping up and keeps stepping closer and closer. I have not earned it, but I'm grateful and I love her. So at this point, ladies and gentlemen, friends, Roger, like, I'm an easy cry. For me, a good dog food commercial typically triggers tears. So there's my masculinity, there's my toughness. You know, when I see Kibbles and Bits and the Golden Retriever puppy dogs, I'm wiping my tears. So I'm wiping my tears in front of my dad. I stand up to walk over and give the man a big old hug like this. And before I could even get my arms wrapped around his neck, he says to me 3 words loud and clear. But because he whispered them back then, I want to make sure they don't come out as a whisper. I'm going to put them in bold letters in front of you, the 3 words he spoke to me. John, sit back down. I'm not finished. And then 3 more, leaders. I have more. Sit back down. I'm not finished. I have more. One thing I want to make sure you understand today is you didn't hire a motivational speaker. You hired a friend who is standing here in front of you humbly, holding up a mirror. And so when you hear these words, don't hear them from the perspective of somebody else with Parkinson's disease or somebody else sharing that story. Read them as if you're taking ownership of this one. Sit back down. I'm not finished, man. I got more. So as you and I roll down the hill, training wheels off, and we just keep moving forward, I'm going to go through the rest of my dad's list only to inspire you to prepare yourself to make a big, long list for yourself. Okay? He'll go first, but you and I are going to follow. The time at home. What a gift. With his 6 kids and his 22 grandbabies. Then he talked about medical technology and the ladies and gentlemen who provided for him. Therapy, pharmacists, doctors, neurosurgery, deep brain stimulation, the works, man. He said to me, John, when I was on top of the world, I don't think I saw the needs of those who felt buried under the weight of it. But now I do. The cataracts have been cut away, my heart has been opened, and I have compassion for those who struggle. He said, when I have to crawl, which is every day. I was with my dad. Sunday night, my mom went out with the girls after dinner, and I had 3 hours on Father's Day to just party with my dad. He's in the wheelchair, and occasionally we just have to kind of move around, hands and crawl. It's hard. So what he said to me was, John, when I have to crawl, I'm grateful for the days when I could walk. It wasn't always like this. When I can no longer speak, I'll be grateful for the days when I could. He said, John, when your mother drives me, I'm grateful for the handicap spot. He said, everywhere we go in St. Louis, we're like rock stars. We are rock stars. Red carpet is rolled out to our vehicle. We park in the handicap spot, best spot in town. And then he said, aren't we lucky? I get emotional thinking about it, man. Like, when was the last time you freaking looked in the mirror, leaders? Myself included, I'm talking to me right now, and looked in the mirror and said, doggone, aren't I lucky to be here, to have life, to see sunshine? There's a bird nest, to hear the birds singing the praise. I'm lucky. My dad says it. At least he used to. Now he just lives it. He doesn't use his words anymore. He doesn't have to. So he just keeps on going on from there. I'm going to go through the rest of his list. It's only 2 more deep. To see and hear and learn and laugh and love and live. And then finally, for being healed, even if not cured. He said, every day, I slide into my wheelchair. I get up before your mother. I roll over to the kitchen window. I look out that window and I wait for it. And I said, Dad, what are you waiting on? Sunrise. I wait, leaders with the disease of Parkinson's disease and care partners and family. I wait for the light to cut through the darkness. That is awesome. I wait for light to cut through the darkness. It reminds me that life is imperfect this side of eternity, and it is good, and the foundation is firm, and the best is yet to come. I asked my wonderful dad 6 years ago for 3 things he's grateful for because of Parkinson's disease. And I wrote this down afterwards. But more than what I had to write down, it's just the way the man presents, the way he shows up, the way he steps into the day and into life with joy, unabandoned joy. So family, friends, Roger, in the chat right now, I'd like you to answer the question what you're grateful for with the statement, I today am grateful for, and then make your list. I today am grateful for. Sue, you're the first one in, which is what I'm driving for in my life, which is just simply contentment. Just contentment. Judd said, I think about gratitude for all that I have every day, but can't avoid thinking about what I've lost at times. Me too. And my father as well, for sure. And anyone who's being real with themselves would recognize that same thing, Judd. Not only all we have, but also all that we have and have lost. Anderson, Edie, my faith, my family, my friends, Raj, my loving Heavenly Father, my caring wife, who I met a couple weeks ago in Zoom, and having this awesome support group. Rich typed in, I'm grateful for my wife and I'm grateful for my family. I'm grateful for my dad. I'm grateful for this little group as well. And I'm grateful for the opportunity to be today with friends. That's my list. So my friends, I told you we would primarily give you 2 big takeaways today. The first one was going to be around gratitude. The second one's going to be around vision. And Joe, just because I see you typing this one into me, I'm going to make sure I share it with the entire group. Joe Dietz writes, I'm grateful for my wife and I'm grateful for her love. What a gift. Don writes, and I'm grateful for my family, grateful for my wife. Me too. So let's talk about not only the things we're grateful for, but a vision to live that out loud through our lives. As Judd said, regardless of what we've lost, regardless of all the things we've left behind us in one way or another. My dad has left many things behind us, but he's carried forward the memories of them. He's grateful for that. So I thought today I would share a little bit of about the individual in my life who has Parkinson's disease, who showed up for me when I needed him most. And it's not my dad. My dad has been there through the thick and the thin. He was there for me when I came into the hospital. He was there for me when I came into life. He was there for me 5.5 months after I got out of the hospital. He's been with me every step along the journey. But this next guy that I'd like to introduce you to has Parkinson's disease too. And he wasn't a family member and he wasn't a friend. And I'd never met him before, but he changed my life. And I hope in hearing part of his story, he might help change yours too. I'll share this story. I'll give you a way to stay in touch. And then I'll open it up for any questions you might have for me. So here we go. When I was 9 years old, I was burned on my entire body when a can of gasoline blew up in my face. This happened at home in the garage. I found myself covered in gasoline in this garage with everything around me aflame, and my own little body was a torch. And it changed everything. Because one moment I was this perfect, happy, healthy, normal. Remember the good old days when you were in quotes, normal little boy. And then in the next, and I had to leave all that behind, my life was radically different. This next picture is going to be hard to look at. Some of you I know are watching with kids right now, or a spouse, a care partner. You may not want to see it yourself, so you may want to shut your eyes for a moment. But I found myself radically changed, no longer looking like this little fella. Now experiencing burns on my entire body. 100% of them were covering my body. 87% of those were third degree. And I'm laying in this hospital bed dying. And as a little guy, I remember thinking like, oh my gosh, my dad is going to absolutely kill me when he finds out what I did to his house. Like, that's all I could think about was my father's wrath. And yet that day, this man shows up with grace and mercy and love. He walks into the room, he looks down and he says, John, look at me when I'm talking to you. I have never been so proud of anybody in my entire life. And my little buddy, today, this morning, I am just proud to be your dad. And then the old man says to me, I love you. I love you, and there's nothing you can do about it. And I remember at 9 years old thinking, oh my gosh, like nobody told my dad what happened. Like clearly he doesn't know I burned down the house, man. But what I did not understand is the power of grace and love and like forgiveness in real time. He changed, and then I changed. And yet the story of change that we're celebrating here isn't being celebrated as my father showed up for me. You would expect that almost from a dad. It's the way a stranger showed up for me. So that's where I want to take this story next. My dad left the room. My mother walked in. She met me with love. But I found myself the following day tied down to a hospital bed, unable to move, unable to talk. There's a trach in, so I can't speak. I'm tied down head to toe, wrapped in bandages, eyes swollen shut. But even in this place of darkness and in misery, I could dream, I could pray, I could hope, I could love, I could set goals, like a vision, and I could listen. Growing up in St. Louis, Missouri, there was one voice above all that we like to hear in the summertime, and it was the voice of the radio announcer for our St. Louis Cardinals. His name was Jack Buck. He was the broadcaster for my Cardinals. He was my hero as a kid. I never met the man, but you don't need to meet everybody to love him. I just loved him. I loved this guy. I loved his voice. I loved his heart. I loved his broadcast of the St. Louis Cardinals baseball team. And then I got burned. And then I found myself on Sunday morning, now it's January 18th, tied down to a bed. Can do nothing. And then I hear footsteps. And then I hear a chair get dragged across the floor. And then I hear somebody cough. And then I hear this voice. And leaders, all it takes is one. This man came into my life one time, and he uttered the words, kid, keep fighting. Wake up. You are going to live. And once you get out, we're going to celebrate you with John O'Leary Day at the ballpark. Kid, are you listening? Keep fighting. Keep fighting. He stands up, he walks out, he leaves a child tied down in darkness by himself, on fire for life. I wrote a book a couple of years ago called On Fire, kind of unpack this story that I'm sharing with you today. I didn't call it On Fire because I got burned. I called it On Fire because how people showed up as love, as hope, as grace, and in their presence changed my life. It is an unbelievable story. It is packed with miracles. It's on fire. It's on fire. Jack was part of that story. He showed up one time. Then he walked out of that room. He leaned his head against a glass door. And he just started crying. Which, of course, we all know is the sign of great weakness. Not at all. I think it's a sign of humanity. In sacred scripture, in the New Testament, the shortest verse is Jesus wept. Jesus wept. And I know that's not everybody's faith background, but it's mine. And I think it's pretty cool that, in my mind, the God of the universe, who loved us enough to join life with us and struggle with us, when he saw other struggles, he cried. He just wept like a baby, which is a sign of love. So outside of my room as a little boy, I'm tied down, I'm in darkness, I'm dying, but there's a hero outside with Parkinson's disease, and he's crying for me. And one of the nurses comes over to him, kneels, and says, "Mr. Buck, are you all right?" And he says, "I'm not sure, that little boy won't make it, will he?" And the expert on her knees looks up and says, "Mr. Buck, there's absolutely not a chance. It's his time. Let him go. Let him go." When this disease and this diagnosis and that negativity shows up in our life, what we do next influences what happens next. What Mr. Buck does is he takes it home, he cries, he prays, he reflects, and he journals on one question. 5 words long. Feel free to write it down if you'd like, or try to remember it if you're so bold. What more can I do to make tomorrow better than today? The following day, there's a little fella named John O'Leary hanging out in this room in a burn center, wrapped from head to toe with bandages, unable to move, communicate, eat, drink, or see. And then the door opens up. Somebody walks in. I hear a chair, a cough, and then a voice. "Kid, wake up. Wake up. You are going to live. You are going to survive. Keep fighting. John O'Leary Day at the ballpark. We'll make it all worthwhile. See you soon." And then he leaves. And then the following day, friends, he comes back. For 5.5 months, he serves this little boy. In August, picks him up in a Lincoln Town car, takes him downtown. We have John O'Leary Day at the ballpark. That's me on the left, guys. A guy named Whitey Herzog on the right. We go upstairs. We broadcast the ball game that night. And Jack learns that night that I can't do anything. I can't stand. I can't use my hands. I'm not a very good communicator. I struggle. But rather than just giving up on it, this brilliant, wise, humble, faithful man takes it home. He's been diagnosed with Parkinson's disease at this point, which, by the way, either makes you wildly bitter or radically compassionate. He takes it home, he cries, he prays, he reflects, and he journals on one question. The question Jack asked that night was, what more can I do to make tomorrow better than today? The following day, this little boy who can't do anything gets a baseball from Ozzie Smith, shortstop for the St. Louis Cardinals. Below that ball was a note that read, "Kid, if you want a second baseball, write a thank you letter to the man who signed the first." I can't write, boys, but I want a second baseball. For the first time since being burned, I invite a physical therapist over here and an occupational therapist over here to push my arms together to break through scar tissue. And together, the three of us wrote one note to Ozzie Smith. We mailed it off. 2 days later, I got a second baseball with a second note that read, "Kid, if you want a third baseball." So therapist, arms, note, letter went outbound. Baseball came inbound. Third baseball. Third note that read, "Kid, if you want a fourth. Kid, if you want a fifth. Kid, if you want a sixth, or a seventh, or a 10th, or a 20th, or a 33rd, or a 48th. In 1987, one guy sent a little boy with no fingers and no chance at life 60 baseballs, teaching the least among us that we matter. Don't forget it, people. Your life matters. Your job is to act like it every day, regardless of the situation. That's what he's saying to me. John, you may not feel up for it today, but your life matters. Act like it. Changed my life. Changed my life. What those little notes did is it brought this little boy not only a little bit of hope, but it brought him back to grade school. Grade school was followed by 4 years of high school. 4 years of high school was followed by 9 years at university. It's a different story. We're not going to unpack that one today, but trust me on it. It was a train wreck. Somehow you graduate. And graduation night, the miracle shows up. The miracle, boys and ladies and friends, is love. I never dated in grade school, middle school, high school, or college. That's a long drought. But graduation night, right on time, love shows up. So I'm going to show you her picture. Then we're going to wrap up this story. I'll give you a way to stay in touch, and then we'll open it up for any questions you may have. But graduation night, love shows up. Nod your head if you agree. Can I show you the picture of love? Yes or no? All right. I see enough heads nodding. Hopefully not nodding to sleep. I'm going with it. Here she is. Is she gorgeous? Who'd you expect? Love. A man named Jack Buck, 76 years old, showed up with stage 4 lung cancer and a disease diagnosis of Parkinson's that he'd been carrying around for more than a decade. But when you saw the picture of Jack up on the screen, do you see a picture of a guy dying? Yes or no? Do you see a picture of a guy who's hung the white flag out of the house? This is a picture of a man whose shoulders are back. He's squirming and he's struggling and he's finishing strong. I told you that love showed up. Sometimes love looks like a 19-year-old brunette named Elizabeth Grace, my wife, who I will meet that summer. But before I meet her, I meet love in the form of a Parkinson's disease man named Jack, who shows up for the final time in my life with a package and a note. The first word on the note read, "Kid." This means a lot to me. Hope it means a lot to you too. And before I show you what he gave or read you the rest of the note, first the question that guided his life. What more can I do to make tomorrow better than today? Kid, this is the baseball that I received when I went into the Hall of Fame. It is made of crystal. It is priceless. There's only one like it in the entire world. Don't drop it. What a jerk, right, guys? He gave it to a little boy who received it awkwardly. But in doing so, it changed my life. I began to believe. And I think that gift of belief led to this picture, known as the greatest sales job of my entire life. And that picture led to this one. 4 kids, a puppy dog in the middle. That picture led to this one. This was Easter morning this year. My kids, I'll start with the girl in the pink dress. Her name is Grace. The boy next to me, his name is Patrick. My wife is Elizabeth Grace. The boy on the far end, his name is Henry. And that tall, goofy-looking kid, his name is Jack, a man who was diagnosed with Parkinson's disease, but showed the world what it looked like to finish strong. And I want to make sure when I fail my boys that they see in the reflection in the mirror, at least the namesake, an example of what it looked like in action. Jack. I want Jack to be reminded of heroism and love and grace and grit. So my friends, as we get ready to wrap up, first the question and then a way to stay in touch. Regardless of where we are on the journey, in my mind, the question that ensures tomorrow, at least in small ways, is even better than today, is to ask the question, so what more can I do with the gifts that I have to say yes to being used for good? Because what we heard in the beginning, and you'll hear it again right now, is you are a precious, priceless gift. Say yes to being used for good. All right. So we're going to begin moving toward the finish line. I told Roger we'd open it up for a little bit of Q&A, but before you do, I'm sorry, I want to make sure you and I can stay in touch. So here's what I'm going to encourage y'all to do is grab your phone if you have it nearby. I'll come back to that story. And text me your email address. This is how I can stay in touch with you. So if you want to stay in touch, I send out something called the Monday Morning Motivation that goes out surprisingly on Mondays. If you want to receive it, it's free. I'm not going to try to sell you anything. The number is 314-626-4421. Please text me your email address or the email address of someone you don't care for. I'll take either. I don't care. Type it in, hit send, be done. 314-626. And Joanne, I see your message. I love you, and there's nothing you can do about it. 314-626-4421. Send in your email, and it's going to trigger three things. The first is this, and I'll keep the number on the screen. The first is you'll get our Monday morning motivation, which is lovely. You'll like it. The second is you'll be invited into our virtual gatherings like this. We meet once a month. It's a broad community, great people who want to live inspired together. So I'll send you a couple links on living inspired together. No charge. Just join us. It's free. It's good. It's encouraging. You'll love it. And we'll use you for good once you're there. And then the third thing is if you guys need anything, reach out. That's why you'll get the number and then the email. So I'm here to serve. I'm going to pass it back over, though, to my friend Roger. So, Raj, it's over to you, my friend.
Thank you, John, very much for coming and for sharing those 2 points with us. I know everybody was very grateful to have you join us today. I know some of the folks were able to ask some things in the questions or comments, but if you have a specific question you'd like to direct to John, just go ahead and unmute yourself or raise your virtual hand and I'll unmute you if you'd like while we're still all together. I'm just going to scroll through people on the screen, see if I'm missing anybody's hands. Well, everybody's very subdued today, I guess, John, not more than normal. I know that in your podcast, which I love, I listen to every week, you always ask at the very end of the podcast, you ask the Live Inspired 7, which I like those questions. Those are good. So between now and the time when we get had, I thought of my own training wheels off, be alive 5. Can I ask you 5 questions?
Yeah, man, of course.
All right. First question is, who or what has had the single biggest influence in your life?
So you're asking for one. I have to give you 2. It is my mom and my dad.
Yeah.
They not only raised me and hopefully raised me relatively well, they guided me through the impossible situation of being burned on my entire body with excellence and humility and grace, but boldness. They made me do things I knew were impossible. They made me eat again. They made me get up and walk again. They made me go back to school. They made me turn around and shake hands in church when I knew nobody would want to shake my hand. And on the few times where people would see my hand and turn away, they made me afterwards shake even more hands the following week. Like none of that I felt worthy of. They made me go on to school. They challenged me to do well. They just kept pushing me forward with love. And all that is like fine and well. What they've taught me lately, and I saw it lived out on Father's Day, what they're doing for one another right now. It just, my father's Parkinson's is relatively progressed. 3 decades of a disease will do that to you. And yet, the way they are like Batman and Robin, they're so equally yoked together. And the only person that has it more challenging than my dad is my mom. And the only person who complains less than my dad, who never complains, is my mom. And for me to get not only 3 hours with my dad at dinner on Sunday, but then 3 hours with them getting him into bed because mom was out that night, I saw the challenges that my mom faces and that my dad faces, again, firsthand. And it's just their love for each other and their love for life changed my life.
Awesome. Number 2, if you could be given a God-given talent, what would you choose and why? Paint like Da Vinci or write music like Bach.
I probably would sing. I love singing, and if you ever join me in church, you'll hear me. Or hopefully you'll never join me here, but if in this show, I'll do it too, man. Outside of that, I have a horrible voice, but I think you're called to use it anyway. So I sing in church like I'm good, but I know I'm not. And I would love to just be able to sing and to do it frequently, not out of braggish, but just to encourage people. I think music matters. When I was a little boy recovering from burns, music mattered to us. And so for those of you who are maybe spending more and more time at home, if you haven't ever fallen in love with music, it's not too late. And you don't have to be on the hit like top 10 chart right now. Whether you go back to the 50s or the 60s or the 80s or Bach and Beethoven, man, music is so healing. So return to music if you turned away from it for a while.
Yeah, I can't get through the day without it. All right, my third question is, what is the greatest random act of kindness that you have ever received from a complete stranger, and how did it affect you?
So there's two. The first one, just to be real with you guys, I was a partier for a long time, and I was on a spring break, and I've never shared the story, so here it is. I was coming back from visiting a friend in Boston, like tired, hungover, looking miserable, and I was sick on a T, like the Boston transit system. And this man who looked like he was probably an immigrant, he did not speak English. He looked more disheveled than I did. And I looked disheveled, so that is saying something. And he walks over to me with a bag in his hand, and he hands me $2 crumbled up. But I'm not homeless. I have a credit card in my wallet. I'm doing fine. I'm flying back to St. Louis later on that day, and I'll shower when I get there. This beautiful man who had nothing, I'm telling you, the dude had nothing, gave me his final $2 because he felt sorry for me. And I've probably never, ever told anybody that story, but it is a true one. And I've sobered up since then, and I've cleaned up my act since then, but I've never forgotten that man's example of generosity. That's like there. It came to me right when you asked the question. And then the second thing that's deeply moving to me is I speak to the Marines quarterly. So every 4 months or 3 months, I get to go out and party with a group of wounded veterans. All of them have a bullet somewhere in their body. And the majority of them are self-inflicted. So these guys are struggling. One of the byproducts of Parkinson's disease is, I'll just be honest with you, suicide ideation and attempts elevate up to 4x what it is in the overall marketplace. So I'm aware of that. My dad is aware of that. And I'm sure many of you are aware of that. And I'm telling you right now, your life is worthy. Not easy, but worthy. So these guys are all, they are all struggling, and they come together for 8 days to be filled up. And I get to be with them for a couple of those days. And there was one guy who was just bitter. Not unsurprisingly, he was just bitter. And he wouldn't participate at all in the day. And I'm going through the Jack Buck story of all the baseballs I received. So he doesn't participate at all. And then finally he just cuts me off midstream and he says, well, how many effing balls did you get? How many effing balls? And he used the right word there. How many effing balls did you get? So I walked over to him and I said, listen, man, if you start paying attention like you actually care about something I'm saying, and you start caring about your life a little bit, not only will I tell you how many balls I got, I'll give you one of them. Deal? And he said, deal. So I eventually shared, man, I got 60 effing balls. And then we continued the conversation for the remainder of our time. And I came out the following day and I gave him my favorite baseball. It's a baseball by Ozzie Smith. So I handed him this baseball and I said, brother, it's yours. Thank you for participating. I told you I'd give it away to you. And so then I got a text later on that from one of the other leaders saying, hey man, you got to come back tomorrow. There's something that the guys want to give you. And where is it? I think I have it. Right here. So the following day, they didn't give me back my Ozzie Smith ball, but they gave me this baseball. And it's signed by 42 Marines who have all tried to take their life. And one of them refused to participate in life even afterwards. How many effing balls did you get? Well, I got one ball. Yeah. One ball from this group of Marines. And, it's right there on my stand at the office. So, yeah, it's a pretty good gift that those guys gave me.
Oh, thanks for sharing that. That was wonderful. All right, Mal, we've got two more left for you. If you had the ability to change just one thing in the world, what would it be and why? Just one thing.
Yeah, I think it would actually be clarity on why we struggle. And I think if we had clarity on that, it would change everything afterwards. So it would change why we fight for borders or why we don't, why we fight for the bigger house or why we don't, why we walk through life dealing with so much grief or why we don't, why we lose sight of hope and faith and why we're here in the first place and why we don't, how we handle the diagnosis or how we don't. Like, honestly, I think if we just had clarity on why we get the things we do, why we struggle the way we do, truly understand, our hearts would just be like, almost like you guys might remember the 1950s cartoon, The Grinch. This angry little green guy, oh, life sucks. And then his heart, when he hears the singing in Whoville for people that have nothing, right? He stole it all. Even the roast beast, like he stole it all, man. And yet then he hears them freaking sing and he's like, damn it. But it changes his heart and it grows 10 times the size of a normal heart. And I think if we knew why we were struggling today and why the guy next to you was struggling and why those in Ukraine and Russia were struggling and why the folks in DC and Tallahassee, like, whoa, man. I had a conversation yesterday with a man who interviewed 1,200 people who had near-death experiences. So we have a podcast called Live Inspired with John O'Leary. And this guy joined us. 1,200 people he's interviewed on near-death experiences. And 1,200. Many of them oncologists and cardiologists. And these are people who don't buy the BS. They're not there to sell books. Like, all of them come back changed with the sense of pure love they experienced once they crossed over. Many of them deal with depression afterwards because they can't even handle this life. And it's like, there's so much suffering here. Because they experience what it's like to not suffer. So for me, that gives me hope on what the other side looks like. And there's a lot more to that story than I'll unpack today. But if you and I had clarity on why we have Parkinson's disease, why we got burned, why she left us, why we got cancer, why he abused us when we were little, why we deal with addiction, man, that would be an awesome gift to give the world.
I agree. All right, last question for you. Where do you go when life gets complicated to get stimulated and re-energized again?
The shower is a good place. I have a little screening porch. I was there last night. We have bullfrogs in our backyard. If you've never heard of bullfrog, coming up to Missouri, man, and check it out, or wherever else, I'm sure they're everywhere. Nature. There's a whole lot of research around forest bathing, and you don't need to go to the redwoods to do it. You don't go outside, watch the sun come over the horizon. So when I need a little bit of clarity, I try to put my phone down. I try to put my stress down. I try to re-engage with the gift of life. And then when I re-engage with my phone or my kids or work or struggles or my dad's disease, I do it way better.
Thank you for sharing that. Thank you again for coming today and for all the words of advice and wisdom that you gave us to think about and meditate on. Man,
you're awesome. Thank you for starting this group. And I'm not surprised that week after week it grows because people need community.
Yeah, well, hopefully we can join your community once a month too. That sounds like a nice opportunity for us to get some more priceless information.
Well, it's free, so it's not priceless. It's worth what you pay for.
All right.
But it's good, man. It's inspiring and all are welcome. So come join us.
Awesome. Well, thanks again, John, for coming. We appreciate it very much.
And honor, man. Love you guys.
Give our best to your dad and your mother and your family as well.
Thank you all. Keep going.
All right. Take care.